Bien, on va peut-être commencer en espérant que ça fera venir les retardataires. Bonsoir à tous et toutes et merci de votre présence à cette deuxième conférence de notre cycle d'automne, les causeries comme on les appelle. Alors en préambule, je voudrais rappeler et remercier, puisque j'ai déjà fait la semaine dernière, mais voilà, on peut le faire plusieurs fois, je crois, remercier la Fondation Sto, qui chaque année généreusement permet financièrement et en moyens techniques et humains à ces conférences de se tenir, d'inviter des architectes européens, voire internationaux, dans des très bonnes conditions, de diffuser la conférence en direct, de l'enregistrer, de la mettre sur le site de la Fondation avec des liens avec le site de l'école. Donc on remercie aussi les techniciens qui chaque semaine s'en occupent et bien sûr les personnes responsables de la Fondation Sto qui sont là devant et voilà, qui encore une fois je remercie au nom de l'école. Alors cette année, vous savez que chaque cycle est un petit peu orienté par un thème assez large qui permet de choisir en toute liberté, je tiens à le préciser, le sponsoring n'inclut pas de contraintes, autre que celle de vous offrir un cycle cohérent, on l'espère, et intéressant. Ce titre, on a appelé ça, j'ai appelé ça Héritages Prospectifs. C'est une sorte de formule un petit peu qui veut dire beaucoup de choses et qui finalement peut être interprétée par nos intervenants à leur manière, c'est-à-dire de quoi héritons-nous, de quels héritages sommes-nous à la fois comptables et responsables, que choisissons-nous de cultiver dans nos projets, dans notre pratique, dans notre conception de l'architecture pour transformer au présent les territoires, peut-être la société aussi, après tout les architectes ne sont pas sans impact, les bâtiments, la vie sociale, mais aussi de quelles traditions, de quels enseignements sommes-nous redevables. Alors la semaine dernière, on a reçu Miroslav Sik, qui nous a montré comment lui faisait vivre toute une tradition très anti-avant-garde, plutôt tournée vers le contextualisme typologique des villes dans lesquelles il s'inscrit. Et cette semaine, nous recevons donc deux membres du collectif, du groupe de Bruxelles, 51 in 4, que vous connaissez sans doute. Ils se sont fait beaucoup remarquer depuis quelques années par leurs travaux qui vont d'études et de recherches à l'échelle urbaine jusqu'à des projets beaucoup plus ciblés, très, très particuliers dont ils vont nous parler. Ils ont aussi développé une manière de pratiquer l'architecture qui est assez originale. C'est plus une sorte de plateforme. Ils sont organisés par studios thématiques avec des sortes de partenariats en réseau pour différents projets. Je crois qu'ils vont nous en parler. Voilà, qu'est-ce que c'est aussi que de remettre en cause l'espèce d'héritage de l'architecte qui fonctionne comme une sorte d'entreprise. Ils ont développé également des pratiques de la représentation, du dessin, qui ont été beaucoup regardées, commentées. Ils vont nous montrer ce soir aussi toute cette activité de maquettes, de dessins filaires, de perspectives collage, de films aussi. Et ils vont nous parler, alors ils ont choisi on leur a demandé, on en a discuté ensemble, de parler des héritages ordinaires des périphéries, les héritages douloureux aussi des années 60, les tours de logement sur lesquels ils travaillent et qui représentent toute une branche de leur activité au sein de cette agence protéiforme. Voilà, donc Olivier, Wim, je vous remercie infiniment d'avoir répondu à notre invitation et je vous laisse la parole tout de suite. Voilà, merci beaucoup.
Merci pour l'introduction. Bonsoir tout le monde. Moi je suis Olivier, ça c'est mon collègue Wim. Nous sommes les deux, nous faisons partie de la collective bruxelloise 51-4, comme Françoise a dit. Moi depuis 7,5 années, Wim depuis 3 années. Et nous sommes impactés dans différents programmes dans notre studio. On va expliquer plus tard. Et donc, bonsoir et merci pour être venu pour bien explorer les projets récents que nous avons établis dans des différents contextes. Je vais continuer en anglais pour me mieux exprimer. Donc voilà, laissons partir. We're actually very honored to be asked to give a lecture about this topic. It's actually a fundamental part of our practice about how to deal with existing fabric and existing buildings, no matter if they are heritage or not. So for us, heritage is a kind of dubious term, which is applied to some buildings, but others who would deserve the term also then not. So in that sense, it's not at all very clear. And this lecture also challenged us to think about the transition we're actually going through at the moment as an office, because the role of an architect is changing quite fastly. We are challenged with more and more complexity, both in the existing cities and the situations we encounter, but also in the complexity of topics we need to deal with and all the different disciplines we need to touch. And I think such a lecture as this forces us to lay this open in front of you and to see together how to deal with this as an architect. Historically, 51 M4E has been an office that has been doing all kinds of projects, from very large-scale studies, such as this one in Bordeaux, 5,000 logements, to also very visionary projects where we just started out of our own initiative, thinking about how buildings could take up a function in reactivating cities. This is one in Brussels, where we developed a tower typology where a whole bunch of functions came together, but which was just out of the blue, so without any brief. We have been doing also large public buildings, so really built architecture. This is an example in the city of Genk in Belgium, where we developed a cultural institution. And then very small-scale interventions, where we go up until the level of furniture and to develop furniture and to see how it actually forces people to behave differently. So I'd like to start the new way of thinking, let's say, with this image of Europe, which is kind of unfiltered image, an image that is not projecting any human interpretation on our environment. And what you see is actually quite an idyllic image. It shows a continent that is almost without human intervention. It's nature almost, as you could describe it, nature that is actually still very present. And at the same time, you see that these environments and this nature doesn't actually take care of borders. It's an organic system which is actually just having its own laws, not clearly defined, having a lot of organic way of working. So you see that there are dry areas which are coming into Spain and Portugal. There is the Euro Delta with also France, where you have a lot of human activity. There is the mountains. So you have these overarching systems which take hold of the continent and which really are self-standing, let's say. And I think it's this what we are interested in, is that we actually think across borders, both on the level of a city and on the level of buildings, that we actually try to make relations between the systems at work and not just thinking out of human-made plots or boundaries and stay within those boundaries. So this is the position where we are based, 51 North and 4 East, hence our name. And it's actually just a starting point from where we look at the territory around us. These are the territories in which we were active most in the past years. Of course, Belgium, the environment in which we are located, but also France, Switzerland, and Albania. Somehow we tend to go to the south. I don't know if there's any reason for it, but the north is still quite unexplored. If we zoom in to a bit closer where we will be talking about today, we start detecting human activity at this scale. So we see Paris lying here. We see Belgium, which is quite brown, out of the built, the scattered built environment we are famous for, and which we should do something about. But still, it's quite abstract. It's not clear what we're looking at. And so we will zoom into 3 different environments today to explain a few projects and show how we actually want to set up relations and actually think about architecture as a systematic process in which we actually host and try to give shape to these relationships and not borders or limits. So let's start with Brussels. This is Brussels. We are located in the north of Brussels. So you have the Pentagon, and then in the north there is a quite undefined area where a lot of things are happening today. You can see it here a bit. We are actually located in the train station, which is next to the railroad tracks. On the left of it, you see the North District, which is a large office district built in the 60s, 70s, which I will talk about soon. And then some industrial site. I will try to point it. Yes, this industrial site, which is now also being reconverted. And we are actually located in this kind of area where a lot of things are actually taking new shapes and undergoing change at this point. These are 2 buildings which we will explain and on which we have been working the past years in this district. On the left you see the 2 World Trade Centers built in the 70s, and on the right you see the former IBM headquarters next to a huge park in Brussels called the Botanique, which is quite famous for its cultural center. And so these 2 towers, we will explain how we approach them and how we try to make change here, and how we go from, as you see, quite a static situation in which they don't interact with their environment, and how they start doing this, or could start doing this. So to explain this, I think we need to start in the 60s. This is a master plan that was developed for the district where we are in. So here in the bottom, you see the North Station. This is actually the WTC 1, what is WTC 2 and WTC 1 tower, so the 2 towers about which we will talk. And then you see a whole array of towers, which most of them were never built, in blue office towers, in red residential towers, which were very clearly separated from each other, or there was a kind of strategy to build the office towers along the axes. So this axis which leads here into the city center, and this axis which leads up to the canal, which you just saw earlier. The housing was actually placed in second line, and were actually replacements for previous, or existing fabric, which was working class houses, which were very small grained. And so the idea was that these houses would be demolished, and which also partially happened, and to be replaced by these big infrastructures, big living blocks. So this is then a perspective of the projection that was made. Here you also see a very big infrastructure that was planned, which was actually the highway going from Amsterdam to Paris, and the other one going from the North Sea, and actually London, to Berlin. And so these highways, who were, of course, infrastructure which was impossible to make at this point because we're in the middle of a city, is exactly running through the crossroads of the 8 towers that were meant to be built around it. This is a perspective of the 2 towers which we will be talking about. And here you see that the idea was to split the level on which the cars would go and the level on which the pedestrians would walk. So there was a clear strategy to separate users from each other and not try to find a way to make them work together. So this idea of trying to give space to everyone, but by separating them, is here made very clearly in architecture, and again is a kind of projection which takes a whole lot of effort to realize such a thing in an existing city, and which of course fell short quite soon when they started realizing it. So here you see the fabric of Brussels. So here again the North Station, here where we are today with our office, and the 2 towers at the moment when they are just built, and you see actually part of the neighborhood around it being demolished, some of the small scale housing left over, but quite unlogically defined. So this neighborhood was completely overhauled. And you see the idea. So here the Sokol was built with the idea of having the pedestrians on top. The same strategy was applied for these buildings in the city center, and the actual idea of the urban planners at that point was that there would be a sky bridge on this level of +3, connecting these buildings with each other. But of course you see the stupidity of this idea when you look at the city and what would need to happen to make this idea become concrete. And so what was left in this neighborhood was this kind of situation where you had the towers right next to typical row houses, working class housing of 3 stories high, not even reaching the parapet of the roof of the Sokol, of the plinth. And so this was really a trauma in Brussels. It was a vision that came from politics and an economical idea of how to make a city work by bringing in forced office towers so that economy would start to happen. But of course, with doing this, losing all the life and social and cultural interaction that was happening in this place. And so this, of course, didn't go without a lot of protests, as you can see. So imagining these were the late 60s, 70s, I think you can imagine something, or the way this happened. And so this is where we are today. You see that the towers are still standing the way they were conceived. Actually, not much happened since then. Some other towers were erected, and actually the district today is quite clearly an office district in Brussels, very close to the city center, but it never really got its scale of what the promise was of this master plan. Neither were the housing or the houses in this district properly replaced or actually linked to what was happening here. So the situation is very haphazard and unregulated and unattuned to each other. So this is the situation where we came in 2017. So we were actually organizing a masterclass in the towers to think about this district, to think what would be the future of this heritage, let's say, and how this district could become alive again. What would be needed to bring it into this century in a meaningful way. And so the workshops happening in this tower were a kind of confrontation with the reality of this district, where you see that civil servants were working, because most of these towers are actually government offices. So you had a very big contrast between students coming into this corporate environment, which created kind of a confrontation for both users of this district, let's say. So the civil servants all of a sudden saw that there was activity going on which was not normal, let's say, until that point in this district, or not, they were not used to it. And also we as an office and students were actually encountering somehow qualities or potential that was lying in this place. And so after a certain time, we also got the opportunity to move into this tower, because this one was completely empty. So the tower was completely vacant because the old companies who were in there all moved to different locations or were not active anymore. And so we also, as an office, came to see what the quality and what the potential future of such a building could be in relation to its surroundings. So here you see a situation of our office, where you see moments where we are working together. We often use the windowsills to sit and talk, and you have this, of course, amazing view around you, which somehow is this quality you don't have anywhere in Brussels. It's the only district where high-rise is really developed. And so you quickly discover that this trauma that was caused is not so black and white. And so we were, of course, not alone. We were part of a community, Lab North, which was an initiative taken by us, Vraiment, who actually works on activation of buildings, and Up for North, which was an organization that was led by the biggest developers who had the property in the neighborhood. So all the investors who were active and who owned buildings in the neighborhood were actually also supporting this rethinking of the neighborhood, because they wanted to know what stage would come next, because all these buildings that you see around have, of course, a lifespan that only goes 20, 25 years, which is a typical lifespan of an office building, because it's linked to finances, to occupants who want to stay 20 years but then want to have a newer building. And so it's also for them necessary to think what type of future for this district is imaginable. And so then, while being there, all of a sudden there was a call launched. A call to reconvert these two towers as an architectural project. And we received this without actually knowing that this would happen. And so we were very surprised, because all of a sudden you are confronted with the fact that the building you're working in and you actually took hold of will also be reconverted into something new, while you didn't prepare for this. You don't know yet what kind of future you actually want, and so yeah, this arrived to us, and to maybe sketch this is the investor who made the call and who owns the property. It's some of his other properties in Brussels. So you see there's a lot of different types of buildings, but there's only offices. So he only develops or invests in office buildings. It's often buildings that go back quite a bit, so that are older and that he acquired or that were purchased with the idea to reconvert them or to actually just keep them in use. So it's not a client that is used to think about how to make mixed-use buildings, how to reconvert buildings into experimental architecture, let's say, or into the type of architecture that I think we all know, which is different from this one. And what's more important is that the investor had a big stake in the neighborhood. So again, you see the North Station here, and so it was about these two towers, so the two World Trade Center towers here, but he also owns the site on the other side of the street, and he also owns this building. So you start at that point understanding that the interest of this client lies beyond this project, and is also actually an interest, as I just said, in what do we want to do with this district. And so that's the nice thing, of course, that as an architect you can also think beyond the plot and think how can we make something from this development, and how can it affect the space around it, and how could it actually lead to maybe different or other projects in the future. What is maybe most surprising is that for such a huge building, because it's about 105,000 square meters above ground, with 5 floors underneath the towers of another 50,000 square meters, is that the brief was quite short. And so you see here the summary of it, which was basically what we got. And so you could say that this is quite confusing, but the quality of it is, of course, that you're very free to do with it what you want. So you see that there was an ambition to turn the monofunctional tower of offices also into housing, into hotel, and also to bring in things that would actually start having a public use, such as retail or bars or restaurants. So this was a starting point, but also this, which was a project made by the architect that was already assigned by the investor to make the project happen. And so the call was actually not for one architect to work together with the investor, but actually as a co-architect, a design architect, to come into the consortium together with the architect who was already on board and actually doing a lot of projects in this district historically seen. So a lot of the buildings that you just saw in the images passing around, this architect, which is Jasper Zijers, has been doing for the past decades. And so this was an architect who was very well known with the area and had also very established way of developing office buildings, but also, as you see here, office buildings mixed with housing, with hotel. And so this was the projet directeur to which we were asked to answer to. This was the architecture. And next to that there was a study by the engineering firm Grijs, which is in Belgium, a structural engineer, of how we could actually reuse the towers. And so there was a whole study made of, could it be that we conserve everything? Should we just replace the floor slabs around the cores that are inside the two towers? Or should we just demolish and reconstruct? And there the question was, do you do it with or without the internal circulation course. So a whole study was actually already done before we came on board, and which showed that actually keeping the towers with their floor slabs around it was not possible. There were issues with the carrying of the plates, but also issues with the free height that was possible, and which you have to somehow comply with for a standard office market. And so what was interesting was that with the previous project there, the Projet Directeur, they already did an exercise of how these two things could match with each other, both reusing the two towers, which is this one and this one, bringing in mixity, so in orange you see the housing, in green the hotel, but also making square meters which were asked. And so what they did here was how to bring in more quality was to, instead of keeping all the floors, they reconstructed a floor where there would be one today, and then skipping 1.5 level to go to this floor, which is a new floor and which doesn't attach to a floor slab today, and then again a floor slab which was already there today. So they were actually multiplying the floor height, which was in the towers today, 3 meters 22, but actually very limited, to 1.5 times this to bring in quality, to actually compensate for the loss in surfaces that you get with this. They propose a third tower behind the two existing ones, but which of course had problems in terms of daylight and quality. And so what we actually did with this information, because this was everything we got, or more or less the moment we had to start thinking about how to react to this, is we said that we would do something radically different, what you see here. So we accepted the fact that the engineer said we could reuse the cores, which are the ones in black you see here. And we said, let's try to make a new envelope around it, which connects the two towers and also improves the quality of the existing towers. So what we constructed was a new volume that actually came in between the two circulation cores. We slightly adapted the existing envelope, which you see in black, of the existing tower, and we retracted it to have better quality of daylight in the between the new facade and the circulation core. And here we added outdoor terraces, which would serve housing, but also offices. And so this is a scheme we actually came up with intuitively, very quickly after seeing the information we received about conserving the structure, but also looking for new qualities in this building. And so this is first image of this concept, where you see the two towers being linked with a new volume. And what we also did in that scheme was, of course, programming the two corners, which today are closed plinths, and actually addressing them to the neighborhood. So on one side you have the greenhouse, or a serre, which would address the North Station and actually the business district. And then on the other side there would be a meeting center, which would be addressed to the more to the living neighborhood and the canal. And so what we did with this, and this was a second important thing, is actually completely opening up this plinth, this closed plinth, because it never got a real use. The idea of having the pedestrians and the cars splitted in levels never came about, and so this closed plinth always was a hindrance to actually make interactions with the city. And so you see here an axonometry of the ground floor. And you see that we actually programmed it as much as possible towards the streets surrounding the building block, so that each street would actually have functions on it, unlike the modernist tower, where you had one entrance and from there you further went inside to the function that you wanted. Here we clearly turned that around and actually made direct connections to the street with the greenhouse, with the shops, the entrance of the housing, the meeting center, the hotel lobby, and so therefore also the streets are actually activated, where today are very desolate. And here you see the integration of this strategy into a drawing which shows the development or the idea of the neighborhood, where actually there is a shift happening from the axis here, which is actually an axis around all the office buildings which were built more or less according to the master plan, where a new axis is being created today between the North Station and the industrial zone, which is also being reconverted today, as I said earlier, into a cultural place, also housing, offices happening here. And so you see that this axis is actually one that links a lots of realities in this district, more than this one, which is very focused on the office environment. And so this axis will gain in importance, also with the Canal Centre Pompidou, which is developed at this moment here, right next to the canal. And so it's this axis which we actually also activated with the greenhouse, the main entrance of the new offices, the shops, and so this would actually be the new main facade, let's say, for the biggest program, the offices in the building. Next to more locally oriented functions, which came here, as I said earlier, the meeting center, but in the meantime also sports, a co-working place, a supermarket, and which actually reinforced again this local street, which was a street that dated back before the demolition of the neighborhood took place. And where today there was a big gap between this housing area and this housing area because of the two towers that came in between and actually having a close plinth. And so we kind of restored that fabric by putting this building, but also the entrance of the housing, for example, on that spot. And then a last thing which we proposed as a first say thing or proposal on the table for the investor to react at was a planning, and a very intense planning, because the investor, of course, had a plan to propose the building to a future user for the offices, which was a very important goal for him to reactivate his building. And so giving a structure to this process where actually different process lines interacting with different people. So there were conceptual talks, programmatic talks, technical talks, talks with the city, and talks with the stakeholders of the neighborhood. Were actually all running parallel to each other, and which was immensely important to actually be able to, in a short amount of time, be able to develop together a concept that would be able to implement this complexity. And so with this proposal, we won the tender, and so we got to know that they actually said, we don't want this projet directeur of the other architects of that you just saw earlier. We want your project. We think it's the best way to reconvert these two towers. And so that's the moment when it started. And this is the office floor where we were in. And yeah, you can see that the conditions in which we had to work and to be able to comply with the speed of developing such a project were also happening at night. This is a little movie to show you actually the environment which this tower had at that moment when all the different organizations were in, we were in, and this project was actually being developed.
Le vue sur mer ou même vue comme ça, sinon rien. Voilà, what can I do for you? Ici on a à la pointe de la façon de travailler dans le futur. On s'organise entre soi. On fait un peu... on se stimule l'un l'autre. It adds to the warmth, I imagine. Oh, you have such a marvelous view also. That's amazing. Yeah. But you're used to the other one, I think, right? Encore un peu plus ici. Un peu plus là. On cherche un système qui se comporte comme un groupe en fait, un petit écosystème. We're looking for the border of such an indoor concept. And we want to work on the edge of what is possible.
We could make a collective working environment where you can meet people, where you can like work in different settings, in different atmospheres, to produce knowledge, to share knowledge, and to invite people to step into this this community.
You take it serious because it is also important for your own present and future. You are more motivated to studying here. I am studying economics, teacher.
Il y a 75 plus ou moins, comparé au 105, et il faut 25% de renouvelable. Alors ce que nous on a fait, on a pris notre calcul préliminaire que je vais expliquer là tantôt, et on a ajouté des panneaux solaires en fonction d'une étude que Mike va expliquer, une étude d'ensoleillement, quelles sont les façades les plus intéressantes et comment elles se rapportent l'une à l'autre. Pour l'instant, on a fait toute la toiture de bureau.
And after that tower, but the skeletons could be used since it's a flexible structure. It could be used for...
I think you're complicating things.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about high buildings and low buildings.
Yeah.
And I'm just talking about buildings which maybe could become social spots, so that it's not always the open space which is public, but on a route like this, maybe it could be interesting that the buildings that you were proposing, these more covered public spaces, that they're sitting on that route, and that suddenly the in between this and that. A year is really short, but the advantage of this place is that it's really dramatic, I would say. If you see how much empty space there is, the pressure on the market is really low. So in that sense, we are not working in the margin almost. We're working in an empty field. Maybe that gives a lot of backup to succeed. This is one of the reasons why I think it will work to make it more structural. It's really amazing how, with all of these assets, how the North District really doesn't have a vision. We are partly the ones that really start to use it as a city again. In that sense, we're just one of the people that try to use this space differently.
So you see that actually the environment we were in was actually part of the process of doing this project and getting the understanding of what the multiplicity of interests was in developing this thing. And so after winning the competition and being confronted with this huge building for us, which is not something we do day to day, and we are not at all prepared for the scale of building and at that point, we started designing it. And so to actually design it in a way that it is answering to the different aspects of what this building could become and how it needs to be prepared to become something that is actually open and not programmed for one use, but actually would be able to shift its identity or its function during its life. We looked at it in a, let's say, holistic way, which you could also call a circular way nowadays, and which actually talks about a lot of different dimensions. And I will go a bit quicker now to go to talk you through these dimensions. So after winning, we also decided to still investigate if we could keep the existing floor slabs, knowing that this would be quite dramatic to tear them down, because you could say we're keeping the cores and the underground of the existing towers, but of course in volume, in spatial volume, this is only a part, although in weight it accounts for a lot. We started making technical drawings, of course, comparing the new volume which we built in between and which has a double height with the existing towers and which have a regular height, and seeing how they would work, how we could solve it technically, and how these things would meet each other. We started imagining opening up windows in a tower which up until then had only closed windows and you couldn't bring in fresh air. This is one of the main qualities we thought would need to be there in order to have both housing, offices and other uses. We started actually netting the program into the building, and you see here a scheme where you see the different programs in the blue. I will take the pointer. In the blue, the housing. In orange, in pink, the offices, and in green, the hotel. And they're actually next to each other. While researching, we discovered that it would actually be more interesting to think of this connecting device that we installed in between the towers as a platform which continues into the existing floors around the cores, and therefore make very big surfaces which are enormously flexible and reduce the building in the height per function, because in the in-between floors you could program the housing. Here you see a very sketchy way of drawing the apartments, and hotel rooms in the other one. And it would actually deliver this building, if you look at it from a surface table, where you have very large floors on every uneven level, where the double height volume that we put in the middle connects to the towers, and housing and hotel on the even floors, which are in between. And it would deliver this scheme, which is quite unusual, and which we also discovered along the way, which was not a design intention or anything. It was just responding to the qualities that we discovered as architects ourselves, while investigating the program, but also the way this building worked with this new volume in between. And so we started understanding the space, started imagining it. So this is kind of interactive working environment that you see taking place in this new volume. But there could also be kind of forest because of the height of the floors, which is 5 meters 30 free height that you have here, which is huge. All kinds of things could actually take place. This is a library. And so this freedom in arrangement of this building was also the freedom that that was necessary to actually convince the future user, the future office user of this building, to come to this building. Yes, here we are. And so drawing office plans for this tower was actually very interesting, because you don't have the boundaries of a typical building where you have just one layer of space to actually make closed or open spaces where you can work. But in this double height volume, you have much more flexibility into how to arrange this, this plan. And so here you see the plan, which is a much more free and actually allows a lot of possibilities. So this changeability is there, both in the office plan as actually throughout the building in its program. So also the programs each other could change. And for this we actually installed these qualities. So here you see a perspective of the housing with the terrace that we added to the existing tower, which works of course for both housing and offices. And so this investigation was also very much a technical one, how this building could actually be converted into time, where today you install housing program and tomorrow there could be an office program, and the changes that come with it are actually all changes linked to circulation, which are linked to how you enter the building, and are not so much structural. So this kind of installation of principles which allow for this change are very important to actually make a building that is future-proof. And so also in the architecture, it's done like this. So here you see an image of the park in which, to which the terraces are oriented, where housing with apartments are actually underneath an office environment with a meeting room where people go outside to meet, and above again an apartment. This being the kind of specificity of the plan we developed with the alternating floors. But which actually is not noticeable on first sight, because the strategy chosen to develop the architecture with is one that is non-program related. So the towers, or the towers that are left over, because we of course cut them short by introducing the new volume, are developed in one language, not linked to the program behind, because this can change over time. And then the new volume in between, which is one that is clearly of a different type, which has a different facade and a different expression. And so this kind of architecture tries to also not be related to any fashions or any specific demands at this point in time, but is one referring to the past, where you still have these darker towers in the city that will happen again, and so this is then a plan of the ground floor. And actually, these spaces that we developed on the ground floor were developed to also be able to interact with activities happening on the public space. So this is an activity that we saw happening during our stay in the building, which was an intervention in the fountain in the middle of this roundabout, where an organization in Brussels, Pool is Cool, did an intervention where people could actually go into the fountain for once, and you see that this type of activity is what this neighborhood actually needs, and we try to bring into relation the space next to it, the greenhouse, which will be not programmed. It won't have a specific program, and thus could go into relation with these types of events which occasionally happen, and where part of it happens on the interior of this greenhouse and part of it happens on the public domain. The greenery strategy, which we developed also as a test case in our office, installed into the building, and also on the roof terrace. I will quickly go through this one, which is talking about the way the old building is on a material basis reused in the new project or elsewhere. So while the building was already empty, so we had to leave it at a certain point in time, all the materials were excavated and brought down and from there actually distributed to either the recycling plants of the producers of the material itself. So even though these materials were made 50 years ago, some of the producers took them back and recycled them, but also went to other projects in Brussels where they made new walls out of these materials. Floor tiles on the roof, which we will reuse in the project itself, and which are stocked today on the site near the canal, and part of them are already cleaned and they look like new. And also things we tried to reuse, such as these covers of the radiators. We made tests of it, we made drawings of it, we made a mock-up, and we actually showed that this reuse is possible. But in the end, not feasible economically, and also it's not feasible in terms of risk, because these elements are also 50 years old, and so they have all slight dilatations and are not so straight, and so to apply them in a technical way in a new building was not feasible, and so the solution was in the end to use them in different applications. This is one of them, which we didn't invent. It's another design office in Brussels who makes use of them as cupboards. And so also the concrete that was from the building was reused. I will quickly jump to the next project to still leave time for Wim to talk about the other two projects. This is another tower we are doing in Brussels, the older IBM tower, and it's actually a very famous building because the ring road in Brussels passes next to it, and so due to its architecture, which is quite remarkable and linked to the identity of IBM in the 70s, it's really a landmark, and so there were plans on the table to reconvert it into something like this. Also something like this, where the direction of the lines was all of a sudden tilted. And at this point, the building was sold to a new developer with which we were in contact, and who asked us to think about how to tackle this building and what he should do with it. And so we went on site, and we discovered that the building as it was had a lot of qualities. So you have these windows which frames the city very beautifully. Each window is almost a panorama. And so we decided that this architecture is actually so valuable and is for us actually kind of heritage, to both to the city of Brussels as in a larger story as modernist heritage. As you see here, the other buildings that IBM made throughout the world, we decided to keep it. And so this is the new project we proposed, where we did just a few adaptations. On the ground floor, we opened up the building. We made a piano nobile, which actually relates the building to the new square in front. And we topped it up by creating a roof terrace. For the rest, we didn't do anything on the design of this facade. And so also interior-wise, the building was very generous. It were all open floors. The only adaptation we needed to do was adapt the facade to create more height here and more generosity in floor height, because there was an old technical gutter for the heating and the ventilation installed there. And so this we took away, as you can see here, and we installed a new facade, but which took over completely the design of the old one and insulated it. This is then the new design with the potential new functions behind it, and which actually would be organized like this, I'm sorry. So the new building, instead of being a monofunctional office tower, would become a co-working, then some offices, and then a hotel above it. And so the building again is being adapted and given diversity. And also on the ground floor, this diversity is addressed to the street, so that this square, which before was not a square, but actually an empty dead zone, would be activated and would become part of the city again. So we worked with the design that the landscape designer already had made for this part of the street, going from a tunnel leading to the North Station and going to the city center. We actually reacted to it by mimicking the design in the entrance hall, by raising together with these steps, also in the interior, with steps towards the level of the elevator lobby. And so bringing in the square. And also actually facilitating the different entrances for the 3 new users that could come into this building. We also designed the relation to the park, and this is actually the result that is being built at the moment. So just a few pictures. This is the state of the tower when it was, the facade was taken off, and slowly the facade came back. And this is the intermediate state, and this is a picture I just took out of the train when leaving Brussels, where you see that the facade today is almost complete, and actually is just as it was, almost.
Hello, everyone. I think we move a little bit more to the north. We go to Antwerp, and then we go back to Paris. We come nearer with the next 2 projects. Where first in Antwerp, we did a very small project in the city center of Antwerp, near the former harbor, which is now becoming a residential and cultural area. And we acquired a new small project a few years ago in, here from an architectural competition where our new client, AG Vespa, is an independent communal developer who has the vision and the ambition to develop and transform the city in punctual ways. So they transform corner buildings into dwellings, and in that sense try to impact the development of the city. Our project is actually spun in between a larger public space, I don't see my pointer, a larger public space on top, and an inner courtyard which is surrounded by residential blocks. The project has two areas, let's say, or two building blocks. It's the gate building and the courtyard building. The historical context is quite stirring in a sense that the plot and the project was part of a monastery, and the gate, a Baroque gate dating from the 16th century, had to be integrated, and since it's a protected element in the project. But you also see that through time, this monastery was adapted and was transformed, and that the proportion and the size, the position of the windows was not like before, and this needed to be restored in the original composition. On the inside, on the courtyard, you see older houses which were really in a bad state, houses where the nuns were before. This is the small alley coming from the public square into the courtyard, which is pretty closed off. It's quite problematic, also knowing the context of the red light district in the nearby neighborhood, and also the problems created by closed off walls, garages that are closed, and blind walls, and also mind actually the fact that the gate building has been adapted through time, and you can clearly read that this building block has been attach to it in a later stage that the upper part of the wall is an extension that happened afterwards. And so we introduced the proposal with 6 dwellings and a shop on the ground floor, where here specifically there was a tension in between public and private space. The city of Antwerp has wanted to preserve the connection in between the public area, the public space, and the nearing streets with this passage. And so it allocated it as a private space, just right up until the plot border. You have the really strict line in between private and public. And the question here rises, how can we make on these small areas 6 dwellings and still have a house which is part of the city, a house which is private, and a house which the people can also enjoy and how they can appropriate the public space. Six units and a shop is the program. So the shop was integrated in the gatehouse, and all the elements that were not original were demolished. And we actually introduced an open staircase here in between the existing or the original gatehouse and a new volume that we created, where the open staircase became a shared space in which people could relate to one another. And the other three units were organized in a 3-story high volume, which was laid out at the back of the courtyard. This open staircase somehow also activates the public domain and allows for better relations from the private units to the public space. You come outside of your apartment and you are immediately invited by the perspective towards the courtyard. I'm taking you up into the open staircase. It's quite a difference of scale, I think, but it shows that how we work, which I will also explain a little bit later. And here it's about size. It's about how to relate and not to relate. It's how to allow a view and not to how to create open relations, and also how to mitigate and how to control privacy. We start from the bottom, where you actually see the height of the wall is just enough not to have a full open perspective on what's happening behind. Going up, you somehow have a surprising moment where you see where you clearly can read the difference in between what was original and what is new, and where the inhabitants and the residents are invited to go up, and where this closed-off alley becomes a more porous, more open environment where light is coming in, where more relations in between inside and outside are created. And for us, this situation was actually not thought of during the design, but arriving at site, we were kind of surprised that by creating this staircase, you also have relations which you don't foresee. This is looking into the terrace of the neighbors, and you somehow feel related, but there is still enough distance to preserve privacy. And this is what we take along in other projects, is that when we do densifications, we try to integrate relations and qualities in order for making those spaces and keeping those spaces attractive. Going up, we are protected by a canopy that gives comfort, going from your own private apartment to the shared terrace. A shared terrace which was needed because on the small plot we didn't have opportunities to provide terraces on each of the private apartments. And of course, this gives nice views to the outside, but it also brings you in relation to your neighbors. It's a large terrace, which visiting the project recently, you see how they appropriate it. It's not only a bench and some plants, which you would expect, but it's also becoming a storage space. And the refined quality of looking back at the gatehouse, the finishing of the staircase. And then the courtyard building, in a sense, was also very small in its footprint. We created 3 units which go 3 stories high and which overlap. The functions of those houses overlap on the floors, but on the ground floor we foresee a very rational exercise of staircases that connect towards the upper levels. And the challenge to think of how can we make this a quality? How can we make those small footprints into a qualitative environment to live in, knowing that the plot actually is private and public in a very hard line. What do we need to provide as a transition, and how can we make a space that a public space that is appropriate, that can be appropriated by the residents? We provided, in that sense, a solution where we provided more space than you would expect in the entrances, where future change is allowed, where residents can choose what they do with their entrance hall, extended entrance hall, with some amenities like a toilet. When you have a birthday party, you don't have to go up, and storage for your outside furniture. Together with space, we also created larger openings and possibility to close off these openings and to choose whether you're enclosed or open to the public space, and allowing also to use the public space. This is an image to these larger entrances, where during COVID we noticed that people use it as their teleworking spot. Zooming out a bit, it gives a view from the courtyard, where we neatly designed the facade of the old monastery courtyard in relation to what was there. So we mimicked the crown list, and we integrated a new square pattern of tiles, which somehow are the back of the new environment of the terraces. And very happy that the residents now use this public space and have appropriated it. Moving a little bit more south, we go to Paris, where we are doing at the moment a project Robin Oratoire. This project we acquired to an offer, through an offer bid, together with our clients, Alteria Codegim, CDC, Habitat, and Histoire Patrimoine. This image actually, for us, is a kind of a key image, because it shows that in this historic environment, a sense of care and solidarity, which has been there forever, is still possible in the cities. Here you see the process of how the site of Robin Oratoire has been altered, changed, and activated. It used to be an orphanage, grew into a large hospital up until 2010, and was then temporarily activated, where I think most of you know the Grand Voisin temporary activation, which meant a new purpose, for a new temporary purpose for the heritage. And we envision with this project to build upon what is already there, and intervene where needed, and keep the reactivated environment open for future change. Well, the Grand Voisin, I don't know if I should go deeper into it, but for us, this resulted really in a vibrant reuse, which resonated on a large scale, internationally as well, is an innovative example of how to do temporary reuse, where new functions like co-working, urban camping, restaurants, but also emergency housing for refugees, the real debate on how to activate cities took place. It's a large-scale temporary activation that also became a new destination within the 4e arrondissement, and where our client actually took up the responsibility with the proposal that we did towards the city of Paris to found a new solidarity property company in which, so La Collective, in which it collects and it brings together different types of initiatives that foresees a continuity of the reactivation that was there through Les Grands Voisins, also into art residencies, co-working, restaurants and shops. And these are the organizations, of which one, the Refugee Food Festival, was there before and will continue to occupy the project. And where this collective actually has the ambition to be an open and welcoming environment, free of charge, and envisions to be actually the same scale of other crowd pullers in Paris. The project is part of a master plan which was managed by or developed by Beltrando, bringing together qualities of accessibility, permeability, reuse of 60% of the buildings, and a mixed-use activation to envision this space more as a process than as a final plan. Our project is more related to the avenue. Looking for the red dot, yes. More related to the avenue, where it is actually renovating the Robin Oratoire buildings and integrating a new entrance building, the Villa d'Enfer, which is designed by Tham and Videgaard. This is somehow giving an overview of the scope of the project, where within the envelope of the heritage, we introduced a multifunctional scheme that weaves the uses and spreads them throughout the ground floor, but also on the upper floors, with restaurants and co-working spaces, and where there is also an integration on the upper floors of a mix of different types of social and affordable houses and apartments. There you feel really the tension in between what is public and what is private. And what we learned from projects like Falcon Port is how to make a transition in between the public life and the private life. Not only on the scale of the resident, but also on the scale of the city. It is important that inner areas of blocks are being developed as part of the city. And in that sense, the project somehow is a mediator, or is a filter, an interface in between the public life on the street and the inside of the building block. And therefore we make those urban reality drawings to envision how people can actually occupy the space, how people can appropriate it, and how they can pass through. And in doing this drawing, we scanned the context and the existing buildings to find a possible structuring way that would make the place both more welcoming and more legible. But paradoxically, the Robin Oratoire building is an ensemble that is very heavy and rather closed. It's a protected building also, And so therefore we introduced an attitude in this demolition plan, which is actually just showing how we de-stone the site in a very subtle way with punctual interventions, and this creates a refined porosity in which uses are brought together. And then you see through larger and smaller entrances that trajectories of people walking and using the space, people consuming, people activating the space, together with a subtle way of dealing with heritage, green space, and built space, provide a welcoming environment. To affirm this urban porosity, we have developed a system of 5 transitional spaces with distinct environments due to their pre-existence and identities, but also complementarity in use that they propose. These spaces are linked by a new circulation on the ground floor. It's kind of a walkway that connects them, which takes part of the larger network of alleys and of the network of how to get into the deeper area of Robin Oratoire. So actually it's also organized around the 2 existing courtyards, so Robin and Oratoire. We created and introduced a new passageway, which is the main entrance to the Saint-Vincent-de-Paul area, and an agora, which is a covered space, a cultural covered space, and as well on the other side, the cour cachée. The agora is a place where art in solidarity becomes a reason to meet and exchange. The entrance passage represents the main access, and the passage is actually animated on both sides by various programs of restaurants, entrance to housing, mobility center, where the Robin courtyard is animated around its perimeter by shops and artists' residence. It becomes a village square to the Saint-Vincent-de-Paul, and it's therefore a place for meetings, for exchange, for very dynamic events during the day, but which respect the tranquility of the housing in the evening. The Oratoire courtyard is transformed into an urban forest with a high density of planted and potted vegetation. It's a unique experience to be there and to enjoy this new ecosystem from the terrace, from the restaurant, but also to enjoy and to walk through during the day. And finally, the 5th place is a kind of a counterbalance to the agora. It's a hidden courtyard. It's covered but not tempered. A place which offers great flexibility of use and which serves as a foyer to the pouponnière, who is actually more on the 1st floor. And in that sense is ensuring the porosity on the urban scale. From the public space, we were not able to intervene that much since it's a heritage protected building, but we used the openings which were there to make this network of this porous network, and we introduced one single new entrance here, one opening of 1.50 meters, which gives entrance to the cour cachée, a very important one, because in that sense we can actually allow for the public to looking for the ring. Yeah. Allow the public to just occupy this cour cachée without actually having to cross other parts of the buildings at night when the residents will be using the cour oratoire. Here the plan is also showing how the different uses and how we were thinking about the flows in between the different programs. Somehow, how can those different programs coexist? without generating conflicts. So the blue is the residence, the artist residence, the orange is the co-working and the cultural, and the white is the chapel, which is there, which will be a chapel in the future as well. And the red parts are the circulation spaces, which are shared spaces. The same as we did with the Falconpoort, we somehow gave more space than was needed, just to allow for change. Here, the entrances are functional for bicycles and for having addressing to the housing, but they're also larger, so they can be flexible and transformed into a place of leisure. Like also in this other project, vertical circulations are designed as places of collective life for the inhabitants, and they serve as and they save the programs of the Villa d'Enfer, such as the incubator and in the two wings of the Oratoire building. And in that sense, also the upper floors have a public dimension, where here you see the co-working spaces in the attic. The Robert and Oratoire building are exceptional heritage, and in terms of that heritage and space, our work was simply to recover a clarity in the circulation, and that may have been lost through time, and to really be in line with the history of the building. For example, here in this space, in the blue circle, we it's a major point of articulation between the Robin and the Oratoire courtyard, and therefore crucially in the project. And by freeing up, so by demolishing a storage space, a storage space here, we opened up the circulation and resulting in a double perspective to the restaurant on the left and the Robin courtyard, linking the different meeting and circulation spaces. What is interesting here is that we used that expertise, which we did in smaller projects, and we scaled them up, and we are quite confident that we can control this transition in between the public and the private. And these circulation spaces, which were previously intended to collective use in the former care houses, they were quite oversized, and they become now today very generous spaces for the scale of private houses, but the landings can then be used and shared between the neighbors, which they can appropriate by installing plants and use as an extension of their dwellings. In a sense, those two projects somehow can be written in a drawing like this, where we focus the program of transformative densification in our office. It's actually in relation to protected heritage and existing structures that aim to integrate new qualities and at the same time densify existing urban environments. A central question that drives us in doing those developments is where does my home actually begin? And how do we shape our buildings so they become robust and open environments to live in? Environments that we shape, that we share with one another, and that take part in the city. As such, we investigate in the transition in between public and private and add design qualities to improve the way we as residents relate to one another in the future. And now I would like to take a moment to talk a bit how we are organized as an office, because you see two different scales, you see two different expertises. We are an office of about 50 people with different backgrounds, very international. Different in experience, and we somehow organize ourselves to exchange the expertise in between us. And where you see in the small project of the Falconpoort that we search for solutions to specific questions, and that projects are project-based and that we have a practice of projects, we now move towards a practice of programs, where solutions serve for the future, for other developments. And that gives kind of a stability to us all, and can confine solutions for recurring problems. As an organization, we invest a lot in our working environment to create good working conditions, and therefore the 51 N4E serves as a platform for the organization, supporting 3 studios. It's the ACT studio, CAST, and ROOT. ACT stands for Active Territories, and wants to develop large-scale adaptive infrastructures, as well as small-scale incremental urban projects. Whereas Capable Structure, CAST, develops architectural-driven projects that reactivate existing situations in capable structures for the future. ROOT really develops and builds natural and landscape environments inside and outside buildings. And within those studios, we organized in a very horizontal way 7 programs which bring together similar types of projects and in which different expertises can be exchanged when a project is overlapping the different studios. And we feel in that sense we can, as an organization which is not really large, still respond to the very complex questions and the complex issues we as a society and as architects would like to tackle. Maybe a small image with the 3 programs within Capable Structures, because Olivier and me somehow represented of are part of that studio. So the Metropolitan Hybrids envision capable structures and try to reuse them and make them circular, activate them in a multifunctional way and make them part of the city. Transformative densification are more about housing developments, but also care projects for people with disabilities or elderly homes or student homes, like in Saclay here in Paris. And try to render quality within densification. And open public structures is another another program in the studio which develops projects for public use. So we somehow have become, through time, a network organization that is looking out for new alliances with other people, with other organizations, and also create an expertise platform that we can, in which we can answer future challenges that are ahead of us. And so we bring our people central, and we support them with enough and good working environments in order to do the project and to transform urban situations. And in that sense, we have alliances in the North District, but we also reach out to Switzerland at the moment, where one of the founding partners, Freek Persijn, is head of the chair of architecture and is developing the New Rope architecture studio, which reflects on the role of Europe and the future role of the architect and designers. Recently, there has been a publication, a chapter, we call them, which reflect on processes in architecture. And these chapters, this one is about design in dialogue, where it researches the role of the architect towards a mediator, an agent, or a curator that sees design rather as a process of dynamic learning, focusing both on output and ways to work together, in an attempt to exceed the expectations of everyone involved. It's an academic collaborative work in search of design, in dialogue together with our office, people in our office, Denkstadt and Endeavor. Next to that chapter, we also have 2 other chapters talking on the Skanderbeg Square in Albania, where we do this project thinking of redeveloping a square, but actually today it was just the seed of a transformation of an ecological system within the whole city of Albania, of Tirana, excuse me. And then there is a new chapter coming up, not published yet, but soon to be, where we talk about the process that Olivier explained to you of sin and how to not demolish that building. Thank you.
Thank you for all these explanations on some very, very different scales of work, which I think your last panorama of how the office works enlightened very much also in its diversity. Perhaps there are some questions. Il y a des questions, peut-être. Ne soyez pas timide si l'anglais vous intimide. Nos amis sont quand même belges, ils parlent aussi français, peut-être moins bien qu'anglais, je ne sais pas, mais en tout cas ils le comprennent bien, donc vous pouvez poser vos questions en français si vous le souhaitez.
D'abord, je vous remercie, c'est un très bon expo. Ah oui, bon, je vous remercie, c'est une très bonne exposition. Je pense, je veux dire, déjà c'est trop tard, 3 mots pour réfléchir après cet exposé. D'abord, est-ce que faire les tours comme vous avez montré est évitable, inévitable? C'est une question. Deuxièmement, architecture, c'est l'art. Où il y a l'art dans les exemples que vous avez montés? Enfin, ce n'est pas d'autre. Enfin, où il est l'art? L'art, comme beaux-arts. Oui, oui. Et il y a les exemples de ça dans on regarde l'histoire de Tours, ça existe. Enfin, voilà, ce sont les quelques aspects à développer. Merci.
I'm not sure I completely understood the question. I think what I can get of it is the first one would, is what you're doing in a way inevitable? And corollary, where do you locate the artistic part of architecture within your projects? Is that something like that? Yes?
Well, in terms of the inevitable, I don't think we position ourselves as architects that know it all, and we see interventions that we do as a process of defining how people should live today and in the future, but we don't intend to define what lays ahead of us. So in that sense, what we do opens up relations, and it doesn't seem to give an inevitable future, but it allows for more than what we can think of today. On the second question, I don't know if you want to add something to that. On the second question, in terms of where is the art in the architecture, I think for us as an organization, we want to develop projects that have quality in their environments, but we don't see the architecture as a value as such. The architecture is always in relation with other environments, with other buildings, with nature, with more complex systems than we as architects can think of today, and how to develop them together. And so, in a sense, architecture for us is next to building environments as important. And so the art in architecture is maybe how to relate to one another instead of imposing yourself as an architect to make exquisite architecture.
D'autres Oui.
Well, thank you for your presentation. Your work is very convincing because you seem to give the same attention to big scale building and also to very little scale intervention. So I have a question that is your relation to big money. That is in your project in Brussels, you have to deal with, I think, a lot of big budgets. So is it a kind of, do you have a kind of strategy in your own agency to earn more money with big building, and so you can also economically have more intention to very little scale programs? And the other question is also related to this one. That is, do you think that the real estate company in Belgium are more open-minded than in France, for instance, or do you have some such comparison?
To answer to your first question, I think the effort we do in these big projects is maximized by installing tools to actually make impact in the whole team that you work in, and also to not do it alone, which I didn't tell about the project of the World Trade Center, is that we're doing it in collaboration with a Parisian office, l'AUC here, who we teamed up with. So I think in that sense we try to make combinations of offices to have more scale, let's say, in an impact, but also the way we organize these projects and what I showed you about setting up this process of workshops is actually a way to have impact and to think in a moment together with all the different stakeholders, because in such a project you're easily working with 50 people together on this, with engineers, client, project managers, so this is a whole bunch of people. You actually try to get them together and produce knowledge in the moment, and then people go to their own office again with this in mind and develop something, and you come together and you can develop further yourself. You can think of solutions. You have to also create some time to be able to make up your mind, because these processes go enormously fast, but you cannot think of solutions for everything in the same moment. And I think this is what you saw also in the project, for example, for the World Trade Center, is that the design of the facade, for instance, only came at a late stage. It wasn't designed all the way at the same point of time. So you have to incrementally build and try to choose what has to come first and create your own path and time to put these structures up. And then your second question about the investors or developers being more open in Belgium, I think that's not the case. We encountered, we have different encounters both in Belgium and in France. I think it's really what happens in these two projects is quite special. And it's really both clients who indeed are very open and let us actually engage and take control a lot about setting up the environment in which these things can happen. And so they are not the ones who steer us. We are more the ones that steer the process together with them. And so yeah, it's just an attitude that we find, and therefore we also have experiences with developers where it doesn't work, and you can't bring them to work in this open way, and so then the collaboration also often falls short and nothing comes out of it. So it's all about human relations and setting up this connection with your client, and it's you can never predict if it works or not. For example, the fact that this client for the World Trade Center already opened up their building for this community to take hold of was first sign that this spirit of collaboration and being open to others was there.
It was very nice to see how you react in different ways to different scales, whether it is on the representative side, so you have different ways of doing your plans depending on the scale, which was pretty interesting, I think. And I also noticed that the user's experience plays an important part in your concepts. So, and that was on different scales and in different locations. So my question is, how do you encourage these occupants and these users to take that orientation you want in your projects? To what scale, to what moment do you keep intervening so that the users can use your design the way you intended?
Shall I start? And then I think it's often not the case that we guide them when they take hold of the building. So it's really designing the architecture, and I think people are intuitive enough to find opportunities in the space of which they can take hold, as long as it is possible, and you design it in such a way. So in the two last projects, for example, I think it's really about this not over-defining things, and not maybe related to the first question, designing architecture as an art piece where every part of it is somehow defined and has an atmosphere which people cannot intervene anymore in. It's more creating the conditions where, with your architecture, to let things open, but also be strong enough to somehow, give these people a sense of belonging and a sense of possibilities. Don't know if you.
It's a very, very critical question. This question of how do you trigger or capture uses. I mean, I was having the same kind of reflection, because your work rests very heavily on the idea that spaces somehow can generate their variety of uses. No, am I right? I'm referring to this very beautiful drawing you showed of the shadowed plan of the Paris project, with all the little characters in it, all very, very dressed in detail. And yes, this one. There was one, yes, this. And I was wondering if you could sort of explain to us, I know that part of Paris very well, I live very nearby, so I know it's a completely dead avenue, right? There is mainly institutional buildings, a little housing, which is quite historical. It's one of the last Haussmannian access towards the south, and it's one of the few car access that escaped the new regulation of the 30 kilometers per hour. It's a red axis, so it's full of cars, of buses, there's nothing on the ground floor, it's sort of dead, right? So, not completely, but dead to the kind of nice pedestrian use you were showing on your drawing. And I was wondering, how can you make a drawing like that? It's not a trick question, it's just I'm wondering, how do you simulate that? How do you calculate or not the possible use? Is it triggered just by the new housing? And further, more deep down, what is your position towards the role of space or program or obligation to activate spaces? Because there is the good old modernist idea that in the end you design extraordinary spaces and they will transform the use of the ordinary lay people. And then there is a more traditionalist idea that the space contains things and is activated as much as people know what to do in them. If you know what to do somewhere, you have a task to accomplish, you do it in a space, and the space matters less than in the previous solution. And then there is the possibility that people just go somewhere because they have to. Because when you put some office somewhere, people have to go to work there because their company has bought some space, and so they have to go. They're forced to go. So and there are many more solutions, many more possibilities again. So my question is a double question. One, how do you imagine this to be able to happen, and which conditions do you imagine apt to create, to make this drawing plausible? And two, what is your position as architects, almost theoretical position, as to the relationship between space and use? It's a big debate, I know, but briefly said, because you insisted very much on that aspect all along.
It's a huge question indeed, and I think every project in a sense is very typical in its context. And what we move out from is that we don't only look at the context, we also look at the relations in between what we do. And indeed, the street might not be the most pleasant one, and somehow it also gives protection to what happens inside. It's just how attractive can you make what is inside so people are actually invited to go there. And so the invitation and the embracing and giving the quality to an environment which is inside is even maybe more important than looking at what is outside. And so the way we didn't show it, of course, but the way we deal with architecture alongside the main entrance is immensely important. Is where do you enter your building? How do you make openings? Is it a large, is it a small opening? These are things which we do care about and which make the architecture. But if it is, so it's more a relational answer that we try to give instead of imposing the best idea or the best building for a question that is posed. One way of answering that question. Another one is that we envision and we imagine a future. We are somehow, as architects, positioned to create imagination, and we think maybe not on 5 years, not on 10, but on 50 years. So some of us might be convinced that this is the future, but we also realize that the project we do is not a final project. It's part of a process. And this induces a dialogue. This is what we are doing now. We're actually learning that indeed on the footpath it might not be the best and the nicest way to walk, but there is something else that needs to change for that to be attractive. And drawing that induces or triggers that debate. And so every project that we do contributes to a debate to improve the environments we live in. So I'm very happy with your very difficult question. I don't know, Olivier, if you want to
this drawing, what you're saying, that this drawing is a simulation of a possible ideal state of use that your project is trying to trigger through its initial intervention. Something like that.
Yes, and also to actively look beyond the plot line of your project, which is very much needed often, because you can only do as much within your plot to make your building work, but often the answer is also just beyond it, like how do you treat a sidewalk, how do you activate your neighbor, how do you yeah, so these questions are often also part of the key to the answer. And so to answer to your second question about space and use, I think what, especially in the Metropolitan Hybrids program that I showed through the 2 towers, you see that we are not in the first step busy with programming the space. We are just making space. The World Trade Center, the idea to make this big volume in the middle of the 2 towers, it was not a specific answer to a specific program. It was more, how can we make it so that a multitude of programs could possibly happen there? So while conceiving it, it was the idea that also a school could happen there, and due to this height and this width and this an art gallery could happen there, an industrial kind of shop could place there, like a kind of how people could work there actually and make stuff, build stuff. Like this is the type of spaces we actually envision. So it's linked a lot to old typologies, where you had these qualities, these big spaces, these market halls, these industrial buildings, which today we are so eager to actually reuse for their obvious qualities in this sense. There we try to recreate it in the new building, which often is not possible due to the strict regulations in terms of budgets, technical requirements, a program which is very specific, and so often it's so rigid, the question, that you can only answer with a very specific answer to the program. But this we try to avoid actually, because this is actually already installing a fixed life cycle in your building because of the specific design for this program. And I think we have to get rid of this kind of attitude that we need exhaustive briefs and everything for designing buildings. Yeah.
Somehow you can say we try to create capable structures which react to a context, which respond today to a need, but should be adaptable, should be circular, should be multifunctional in use. Because what we build today will last for a very long time, and we see now that we destroy buildings which are not maybe even 20 years old. So now we have to think on the future in 50 and 60 years old to have buildings that at the moment have less energy needed to adapt them to comply to new needs.
On that note, thank you very much for that moment.
Thank you for having us.